All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to our AAP advising session for fourth year medical students applying into the field of PM&R. This event is coming from the Medical Student Educators Council of the AAP. So we have 5 faculty advisors here with lots of different experience teaching and advising all different medical students from around the country. So hopefully we can provide some answers to some of the questions you've submitted and some of the frequently asked questions that we've heard this year. So I'm Leslie Rydberg. I am the Director of Medical Student Affairs at the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab, and I work as an advisor for Northwestern University Feinberg School of Medicine. I'll be your moderator today. We are also joined by Dr. Nathra Ankam, Dr. Robbie Tassi, Dr. Ashley Bolger, and Dr. Carly Souter. So that'll be your panel today. We're going to go ahead and kick it off talking a little bit about applications. But first, if you have any questions, please submit them via the chat and we'll try to get to all of your questions. If you submitted a question in advance, we've read them and hopefully we'll discuss them a little bit in the session. But let us know via the chat if you have additional questions. Also, we are recording this session today to make sure that any students who are unable to join can watch the recording at a later time. All right, I'm going to kick it off with Dr. Nathra Ankam, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nathra Ankam. I'm an associate professor of rehabilitation medicine and director of undergraduate medical education for the Department of Rehabilitation Medicine. And I've been a physiatrist now for about 13 years, which I can't believe. I'm going to talk briefly about applications and specifically personal statement. When we think about the personal statement, we want to make sure that it's something that's specific to you and that showcases you, but isn't really out of the mainstream. So when I'm reading a personal statement, I want to see that the person understands what rehabilitation medicine is. So maybe there's a patient or an experience that brought you to rehabilitation medicine, and to see that they have given me something about why they would be a good fit for our program. I think there is an additional paragraph now for the personal statements stating why you want to go into the program specifically. And I think now with there being more applications, I think that paragraph is going to be desired by a lot of the programs. I think that the personal statement, you want to make sure that it's read by a trusted advisor to make sure that you are not that you're not outside the mainstream and that you're not going too much into detail about things that you don't need to go into detail about, and that while you're still explaining maybe deficiencies in your application and showing the personal growth that you had going through that, whatever that experience might be. In terms of activities and things that you should put on the CV part of the application, include activities that you had a leadership role in, that you were part of, that meant something to you, because we'll ask about some of those activities, and we want to see that you have things that you enjoyed doing and were able to do outside of medical school in addition to medical school as well. So I would say that any of the research that maybe stopped because of COVID, I would add that in. That was one of the questions that we got. And I think that I tend to tell my students if there's works that they are submitted or preparing, they can put the title of the work and put submitted next to it, because we know that it takes a while for things to get accepted, and we want to see what you've done and that you've had some academic, that if you have academic output, we want to see what that is. But we're not expecting that of everybody. We also look at leadership roles in clubs and other things to be also great assets, because it shows that you're a team player and you're able to deal with conflict and you're able to pull something together. So those were I think I hit on the questions that we got. Are other people have some things about the application that they would want to say from their perspective on the panel?
I personally love reading personal statements because it's a really good way for us to really get to know you. And so using that as an opportunity to kind of explain who you are as a person and where your interests lie in a way that ARIS can't really describe for you. So you can list on ARIS all the amazing things you've done, but I don't know why you've done them, or how that made you want to be a physiatrist, or how that changed your thinking. And so this is a really good place to showcase the things that don't show up very well in an ARIS application. And so this is really one of my favorite things, is to read the personal statement. Most important thing is that, you know, have someone check it for grammar, have someone check it for content, make sure it reads and flows okay. But you just want to make sure that it's not too out there, right? So the vast majority of personal statements are going to be very good. You know, you don't want to be that outlier that the person reading it is like, whoa, this is kind of coming out of nowhere, right? You don't want to be too quirky or too unique. So I think that's, I guess, my best advice.
I think, right, don't be too quirky, don't be too unique, but then, and then also when you're describing your journey to PM&R, if it happened to be from a medical condition, or health condition, just make sure someone else reads it as well, just to ensure that you're framing it in a appropriate way.
And just one thing to be mindful of, just avoid the rehashing of your CV. I think some people feel the need to just list all the things that they did, but that's why you have a CV. So as Nathan had just talked about, all those fun, unique things, quirky things that make you your own unique person, is what, like as Leslie said, she's going to be like, oh my gosh, that person's really cool. I think we want to give them an interview. And then of course, during the interview, this is what we're going to be using to state how we're going to have a conversation. So if you really love basketball for whatever reason, and you're writing in there, that might spark a discussion with somebody the same way something about food, you're a foodie, and somehow you incorporate it into your personal statement. Like, fantastic, you know?
Yeah. I like talking about the different details of what are in the application and figuring out what makes someone happy, you know?
And remember that anything, anywhere on ARIS, anywhere in your personal statement is fair game for the interview. So only put it in there if you're willing to talk about it on interview day.
Yes.
All right. And a couple of,
go ahead. I was just going to say, in relationship to COVID more specifically, I think I've gotten a lot of, I know a lot of you probably on this call have had some unique challenges with kind of your fourth year and how you thought it was going to be structured and then how it ended up being structured. And I think, and I'll defer to my co-panelists if they feel differently, but I think the personal statement, especially if yours coming from a school, you weren't able to get a traditional away rotation, I think that's a really nice time to be able to kind of point that out, especially if you think the rest of your application isn't necessarily going to scream PM&R like you hoped it would have, because I think this is definitely a very unique year for all of us.
We have several questions in the chat about the extra paragraph in the personal statement. So I think that the most important thing is, in general, people try to make their personal statement about one page. And I think you should have a one-page standalone personal statement. And then another question, should the extra paragraph flow with the rest of the personal statement, or could it be an additional paragraph at the end? I personally think it should be an extra paragraph at the end. I'd love to hear what the rest of the panel thinks, but I do not think you should write a separate personal statement for every program that you apply to. I think you should have your one personal statement and then add a paragraph on at the end. So how is that going to help you? If there's something unique about that program that really shouts out to you, like you really think that their ultrasound program is great, or you really like their inpatient rehab structure, put that in there. If you have family or personal connections to the area, put that in there. Just because, exactly as Naker said, having additional reasons why that program thinks you might want to come there, I think will be a benefit to you.
Go ahead. Oh, just in terms of the structure, I think if you, let's say it's 4 paragraphs, or 5 paragraphs, whatever it is, that last paragraph, people usually write it as a summative kind of concludatory paragraph that has just a lot of fluff. So if you really think about it, that last paragraph, just keep your first line that says like, oh no, I'm a great PM&R future candidate. And then just transition to, I love program X because of all the things that Leslie had said. So that's an easy way to kind of flip that last paragraph to the specific, you know?
Yeah, I think that's great, Ravi.
Agreed.
Additional question, if a program does not explicitly request an extra paragraph in the personal statement, do you expect it to negatively impact applicants by including one? I do not think a program is ever going to think negatively of you if you say specific things you like about them.
Nope.
I think we always like to hear that.
Yeah, I think your biggest issue is just making sure that the paragraph you've written goes with the program you applied to.
Right.
Yeah,
and the other thing I would always say is don't make something up just because you think we want to hear it. You know, be ready because we can ask you about it. And so like, you know, make sure it goes to the right program, but also make sure it's genuine. I think, you know, we've probably all gotten that situation where, yeah, it feels good, but we know it's just a bunch of, you know, fluff.
Mhm.
All right, is it acceptable if the extra paragraph goes beyond the standard one-page personal statement? That is acceptable to me.
Me too.
Yeah.
I think it's acceptable.
Yep.
Now that separate, I would say the separate paragraph doesn't need to be a half page though. If you're talking like go past 1 page, it probably doesn't need to be like a whole additional half page, but.
If program directors are asking for an extra paragraph, they better be prepared to read an extra paragraph. That's what I say. All right, if a manuscript is in progress but has not yet been submitted, should we include that in the ARSCV? Nathra, do you want to answer that one?
I think you could, because I mean, I think that you could say that the manuscript is in progress as long as you're saying what stage the manuscript is in. That's acceptable. Does anyone else have other thoughts about that?
I agree. I think that's acceptable. I think it also gives another opportunity to talk a little bit more about your project when the interview time comes, and allows the reader, the interviewer, to be able to consider that information ahead of time too.
And I mean, I think the idea would be just don't mislead the reader.
Yes.
So as long as you're honest, that's going to be important, because if let's say Nathan was asking that question, how was that research project? And you're like, oh, I just delivered papers from one location to the next. And you're clearly overstating what the importance of this project was. You know?
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's move on to talk about programs a little bit more in general terms. So Ravi, if you'd like to talk next.
Yep, I'm Ravi Kasi. I'm at Rush in Chicago. I'm the program director here. So in terms of the questions that were submitted, I'm going to go through each one. It says how to determine how many programs to apply to. In my opinion, I think the whole team will kind of chime in with what they think. You want to apply to as many programs in order for you to get around 10 to 12, maybe 15 interviews, because you want to rank right around that 10 mark. Now, here's the key. You have to know and be honest with yourself on what type of candidate you are. If you are the world's greatest future physiatrist, great. But that's not everybody in the room. So for example, if you are an IMG candidate, you might need to apply to pretty much every program in the country, because you know it's going to be a harder path. If you know that your board scores are, you know, like very iffy, and you've been told by a mentor, like, hey, those board scores are iffy, you might be filtered out by some programs. You might need to get to that 50 mark of applications sent out to get 10 to 12 interviews. So what I would suggest is that, you know your mark. You need to get that to that 10 to 12 to 15 mark of interviews. Talk to your personal mentor on what type of candidate they think you are, and that'll let you know. And my word of advice is play it safe. You're investing in your future. So if it takes a little bit of extra money, you know, figure out a way to make it work. I know I'm oversimplifying this because I know a lot of you are looking at debt, but if they tell you apply to 30, just give an extra, 35 or 40, just to play it safe. It's not going to hurt you. Now, in terms of, how you're looking at programs, what I tell people is that you need to personally figure out what your rank list will be. What I mean by that is, what is important to you? So if you're from the West Coast, identify that. I love the West Coast. I need to be there, or I need to be in Miami because my family's there. Because the bigger things that people talk about is wellness, right? But wellness is such a multifactorial thing. A program is not going to create wellness in the way that you want wellness to be created. What I mean by that, there's only so much they can do in terms of duty hours and everything else. But if your family support system is fundamentally the most important thing, you've got to start there, right? So think about location, think about family support and how that plays into your decision making. Maybe, honestly, prestige is the most important thing. You're like, I want to be a future senator. I need to be at your most prestigious program. Then start there, right? So you know that. Maybe you're just like, I don't care where I go. I just need a match. Well, fantastic. Then you're going to apply everywhere and just figure it out. And the final piece is, maybe you just are open to anything and you just want to feel out programs. Well, that's fine. But then at the end of the day, you've got to be able to filter in 15 programs that you can do interviews at. Because even if you've got 50 interviews, it's going to be very difficult for you to go in 50 interviews, even though all of us are really accommodating. I think we might just tell you, maybe, limit that because you can't miss every day of the rotation. And then in terms of, your fit, that's really hard. I would just say be mindful of negativity about a program. So if someone says something like, gosh, I hate that program because of blah, try to get concrete information because maybe that person wasn't the best fit. What I tell students all the time is, if they're big football fans, you might think, this quarterback from this college is going to be the greatest player ever. They get drafted and they do poorly, Is that because they messed up? Maybe they were with the wrong coach, the wrong team. And so you have to think of yourself as the greatest quarterback in the world. You need to find that right coach, that right teacher, and the right location. And all that is so different from one person to the next. So don't look at, your best friend who says like, program X is the greatest in the world. You just need to find the fit for you. So during the interview, you got to ask those right questions of like, hey, what if I had, let's say you have a medical condition, you don't need to disclose that, but say like, hey, what if I need to take a week off on a week's notice? When is the last time a resident had done that? And how did you approach that? There's very pointed questions for you to kind of ask that. And we're all here to kind of help you with that. And then in terms of number of interviews, I think we talked about that. And then people asked about transitional versus prelim programs. Fundamentally, they're all supposed to be the same, but not every program is made to be the same. What you have to do, and I'm very much old school. I'm a nerd, right? I believe hard work will take you far. So when I was applying, some people are like, oh, this program is going to be so chill, it's going to be so awesome and whatever. But you're going to be paying for it, PGY 2, 3, and 4 year. So find a program that's going to kick your butt, get you ready and prepared for PGY 2 year, which most places are going to be inpatient rehab, which is, for whatever you think rehab is, easy. It's not. Inpatient rehab is its own beast. So you need to be prepared. So find a place that's going to prepare you. In terms of advanced and categorical, my advice on that would be pick whatever makes sense for you. So for example, we know categorical positions have an advantage of being all integrated within the same system. But some people might say, well, I want to get a different experience, or I want to spend 1 year with my loved one, or I had one student who spent 1 year in Hawaii, greatest guy in the world. I was like, what a genius. Like, I wish I did that, right? So, and if you do that, you have a lot of life experience. You might spend one wonderful year with your family before you moved East Coast or wherever it is. So I don't think there's anything wrong with advanced and categorical. At the end of the day, you get that same diploma, and what you put into PGY 2, 3, and 4 year, what's going to define you, but make sure you set yourself up for success. So even the guy that went to Hawaii, he was a superstar. So at the program he's at now, he's amazing. So, I think those were my questions. So I will shut up now. I'll let the rest of the group kind of give their input.
One point on the advanced versus categorical program, if one of your top choices has both an advanced and a categorical, then you probably want to apply to both and rank them 1 and 2 or 3 and 4, wherever they fall on your rank list, to make sure that you are giving yourself the highest chance of matching at that program. So I would rank them, right next to each other, wherever they end up on your rank list.
And I would echo what Ravi said about the doing a transitional versus a prelim year. I think a transitional year allows a lot of opportunities outside of medicine that can be really complementary to PM&R. But again, it's definitely what you make it in choosing your electives and choosing your rotations. I think you can really make a transitional year into an extremely valuable, rigorous year.
Yeah, I think I agree with what Ravi was saying about, and Carly was saying about transitional versus prelim. I think that inpatient rehabilitation, just having that knowledge of who is sick and who is not, is really key. So you want to make sure wherever you go, you're able to do enough to get that knowledge.
I think that one of the biggest questions that we've seen this year is really, how can you assess fit of a program when you're doing a virtual interview? So if anyone on the panel wants to weigh in on that, from my standpoint, I think you need to think about what's most important for you in a residency program in terms of, is it something that really prioritizes inpatient? Is it something that prioritizes pediatrics and has good pediatrics exposure? Is it a program that has really good sports medicine? And you can really gear a lot of your questions during the interview day to figure out where strengths in programs are. Of course, a program doesn't say on their website, we're really good at sports medicine and we're not so good at pediatrics. It's not quite prioritized like that, but you can certainly ask questions about what is your approach to teaching residents about pediatric rehabilitation, right? Or what's your approach to teaching ultrasound, and really try and pull out how they've approached these different rotations or things like that. And then from my standpoint with fit, I'm hoping that the programs will be able to give you a chance to speak to multiple faculty members and multiple residents in formal and informal settings, so that you can have some of those same interactions that you do in an actual interview day. You're not going to be able to walk around and see a lecture in action and see how everyone's interacting together, or see the workspaces exactly, right? To see how people are casually interacting with each other. But I do think that they're going to have, virtual, with these virtual resident panels and things, you can see how the residents treat each other in that meeting, right? So you can see what kinds of questions they ask each other or how they introduce each other, and get a sense of some relationships based on that. What else do you have to add, my panelists?
I would definitely agree with that. I think sometimes people do sort of those social events, or the, in a normal year, like the meeting with the residents for that more informal thing is kind of an optional thing. Especially now, I would say to take full advantage of every opportunity you have to get to know the residents, including things that may not be, truly required. I think there's going to be a great benefit for you just getting to know people, like Leslie said.
And I can speak a little bit. We've started doing fellowship interviews, and I've been participating in those. And the actual interviews in themselves, you can pick up on, they feel very similar. Yes, you're talking at a computer screen, but some of those jokes that you would make when you're in person across a table, you're still making those. I think, from what I've heard from the applicants, it's not as scary. And granted, these are residents applying to fellowships, so they're in a little bit different place, but they've been pleasantly surprised as the feedback I've gotten, and they feel like they've gotten a good vibe of, the faculty, and as well as the different fellows and residents and that kind of stuff. So obviously it's a new situation for everybody. And I think just continuing to remind yourself that, a lot of us, even that are talking to you today, are probably just as afraid of this process as you all are. So I think that can kind of calm some nerves as well.
I just echo everyone's saying that, take advantage of those informal opportunities, because I think the residents really give you a sense of the program and like, do you fit with them? Do you want to be their colleague,
But I think we will come back to this a little bit more. Ashley's going to talk a little bit about virtual interviews, and so we may touch on this a little bit more there too.
So hi guys, I'm Ashley Bolger. I am an assistant professor of PM&R, and I specialize in pediatric PM&R. I'm clinically located at Cincinnati Children's Hospital, but I also am the medical student clerkship director for University of Cincinnati, as well as the program director for the combined pediatric rehab program. So I hold a lot of titles within medical education, but hold on, I'm pulling up my question list. My phone just closed. So I'm going to talk a little bit about virtual interviews. I'm going to take the same approach Ravi did and kind of just go through the questions. And then if there's anything else, certainly add them to the chat box. But one of the questions we got was what questions to ask while interviewing. My advice is always whatever you think is important. Again, I think we've alluded to a little bit, especially in this virtual format, you're trying to get a feel for the programs you're interviewing at, and what is important to me may not be important to Leslie and may not be important to Carly. And so I think, think about that before you start going on your interviews and what you really want to know from a program. And I don't ever mind, applicants will often ask me like, well, I already asked this question, but I'm asking you, everybody. I'm personally okay with that, because I think, you may get different responses from different faculty or different residents. And I think, just kind of weighing all those answers is often helpful. But I would say, I always advise, don't, shy away from asking a question because you think we want you to ask it. I think, I can talk about a lot of things, but it's a much easier, more flowing interview if I feel like we're actually being helpful to each other in the conversation, if that makes sense. So I would just say prep what you want to know, and kind of have your list in your head or on a piece of paper is totally fine, about what you're trying to kind of find from each program and what you're trying to tease out. Next question was how to get a feel for a program while interviewing. I think, again, this goes back to kind of prepping for each program and knowing what questions you want to get. And I think, tailoring a little bit of this all overlaps with what we're all saying, but, Ravi made a great point is, know in your heart what's important to you. And I think that's a great way to structure, how to get to know those people. Is family important? Ask about what the residents do outside of, the school, outside of work. Is it a family friendly program if that's important to you? I think, it's really, again, about the individual questions. And I think, for the most part, as long as you ask them in a respectable way, you're probably going to be okay. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that, but I mean, it's really, you got to figure out, just as much as we're trying to figure out what a good, what residents are a good fit for our program, you've got to figure out where you're going to fit in and where you're going to thrive for the next, 3 to 4 years, depending on what program you're in. So the next was what kinds of questions to be prepared for, and I'm going to link that to what sources do you recommend for sourcing practice interview questions. There are a lot of, I think resources and web addresses of links. I know our school provides a list. It kind of floats around the medical school of like questions that previous people that went into PM&R got asked, and they, all the students have access to it. So, I mean, certainly check with your schools to see if they have anything like that. I think in general, I mean, PM&R is a little bit different. I think, we're all trying to get to know you as a person. So I think, be prepared for some of those kind of questions. But, I tend to like to ask about, different things on your application, especially if they're related to leadership and what did you learn from it? And, what's your proudest accomplishment, that sort of thing, just be prepared for those kind of things. I think everybody always has heard the, what was your hardest moment in residence or in medical school and how did you overcome that? I think those are all fair game. I don't remember, at least I am far enough away, but I don't remember getting any really, really weird esoteric questions on PM&R interviews. And I don't know many people that do that. That's not helpful for anybody. So I think, just kind of looking at like leadership things and, overcoming obstacles and teamwork, because PM&R is a, big teamwork thing, that might be a common theme. But certainly, does anybody else have any other thoughts about like specific topics? I know there's a lot of references out there. I don't know that I have a favorite to point students towards. Does anybody have a specific, like looking up questions?
I would, I think the biggest thing is not necessarily the question being asked, but the amount of practice that you've had. So I would just simply state, find one person in medicine, whether it be a friend in med school, with, interested in rehab or not interested in rehab, but someone in medicine that can just pepper you with questions, and you can find anything online. And the second one, I would find someone outside of medicine, both of whom should be willing to give you really blunt, constructive criticism. So that person outside of medicine can really focus on those, like the interest stuff, like tell me about the most challenging part of your life. That's a generic question that anyone can ask. but that person that knows you can tell you if it seems like very BS-y, because they know when you're telling a fib or whatever. And when you practice it, then it's going to seem a lot more like stream of consciousness. So you're not like thinking, I'm trying to get this piece of information. So
be prepared to answer why you want to be a physiatrist over and over and over again and not sound like it's rehearsed.
It's a really good point.
Every time, because we want to make sure you know what a physiatrist is. I mean, it's seriously, so you're going to answer that a lot. So just make it sound like you're really conversational and engaged with the question, even though you have heard it 50 times already. So,
Robbie's comment made me think of one other thing. If anybody has things on their application that are either, pseudo red flags or red flags that you're expecting to get asked about, I would practice those with somebody too. Like have them bluntly ask you, why did you fail this class? What did you learn from it? Because I think the more times you can like spit that out before you're actually in the interview, I think are really helpful, because it never comes out the way you intend it to the first 1 or 2 times you run through it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right, we're gonna move on to Carly to talk a little bit. Oh, yep.
There was a student who said a question. Can I read that question to the group?
Yes, go ahead.
It says, for the folks who do not have family in a geographical area of interest, how can we emphasize this in our extra paragraph that our residency program appeals to us? They said that they've been commenting on curriculum focus and structure, but they may feel like this may only go so far when other applicants comment on similar aspects. So anything we want to add?
Well, I would say, as long as that interest is quite sincere and well thought out, I think that's absolutely appropriate and would show really sincere interest. I think having a family connection is great, but that really isn't the primary thing that we're looking for. We're really looking for someone who has sincere interest in an aspect of our programs. So, and that may be repetitive with other people, but I think just use that opportunity to go through and really be sincere and tell us what particular aspects of our program you're interested in, regardless of any family connections.
I mean, we're saying, like, if we're looking through the personal statement, oh, this is cool, we like this person, and then we see at the end, oh, they like us too. I mean, it doesn't matter if that end is repetitive. It matters more that, oh, we like this person, oh, and they might like us too, and might think that we're a fit for them. So that's what you're going for in that extra paragraph, And then I would just say, in terms of other interview questions that sometimes people might ask are, is there a patient that, experience that you had that made you, like with a patient that made you think about rehabilitation or those kinds of things. So just maybe have a patient in mind too.
I would, in regards to the family aspect of it, like being an Indian person, I feel like everyone always claims to have like cousin everywhere, but they're not really cousins. They're just like these random family friends that you have. And so, at the end of the day, I think honesty is the best. And as Carly said, that genuinity is going to be so important. So whatever makes you interested in the program, commit to that and stick with that. Don't make anything up. And at the end of the day, in life, people are going to pull you one of 2 ways. There's going to be people that want to have you fail and going to find everything wrong with you for whatever reason. So your board score wasn't high enough for them and they didn't want you to get the interview, and they're going to be like, I really question why they want to come to this location, versus somebody else that says, oh, I'm going to find everything right with this person. You could have failed it, 100 times, but like, I really like this person. They're amazing. They're going to say, no, we're going to recruit them to come over here. So, just really commit to what's most important. Like, just be honest. And I think you're going to be fine, because everyone states that they've got family. I mean, we're in Chicago, so everyone claims that they have family in Chicago. I never know if it's genuine or not, So.
It looks like there's another question here.
Yeah, so I was going to have Carly talk, and then Lisa's question, I think, fits in with Carly's topic a little bit. So
excellent.
I'll make sure we get to Lisa's question.
Great. So I'm Carly Sauter. I'm from the Medical College of Wisconsin. I'm an assistant professor. I'm the director of medical education for the Department of PM&R, and I'm course director for one of our undergraduate courses. So I'm going to talk a little bit just about some of the kind of logistics of the interview this year. Things are obviously quite a bit different. And as someone stated earlier, really this is new for all of us. So it's new for you guys, but we're all kind of learning as we go here in terms of transitioning everything over to virtual too. One of the things I wanted to talk about was the general structure. And so I think a lot of programs are aiming to keep the structure relatively similar to our prior structure. What that looks like for most programs is going to be some type of a social event, which we touched on earlier, just a more informal getting to know you event, usually with the residents. While that typically would occur either as a night before an interview thing or maybe a lunch the day of the interview, that may not be the case this year. It may be, and many programs probably will keep that on the same day, but there's others that will possibly be doing it sort of like a once during a week for multiple groups of candidates. That's going to vary a little bit, but you'll certainly get more information. And I would expect most programs are going to be giving you the opportunity for that too. The interview day itself, in general, there's going to be some kind of a program overview, typically run by the program director, sometimes the chair, sometimes the chiefs, to give you a little bit of information about the program itself. And then you'll go on, in most cases, to have interviews with a combination of faculty and residents. Most often that's a one-on-one type of interview, approximately 30 minutes. Again, that can vary by program. I would say most programs are doing probably between 4 to 6 interviews. Some maybe a little more, some less. I think there's a few programs out there that are doing group interviews. And so I would anticipate those would be a similar type of structure for most programs where you'll have that one-on-one time with faculty and residents. Typically on an in-person interview day, programs would offer tours of their facilities and things like that. That's obviously not an option this year. I would anticipate most programs doing some form of a virtual tour. So either on that day or providing you with links to get a chance to sort of have an overview of what the facilities are like. But in most cases, it's going to be multiple facilities. I would say in terms of a time frame, you're probably still looking at spending several hours or anticipate like a half day with a program to get through that whole process. Despite the fact that we're virtual, I think some of the sort of norms that we have for interviews and so on are going to remain the same. So professional dress is still going to be required. I would say in most cases, appearing professional, suit and tie, or whatever you feel comfortable professionally wearing. When it comes to some of the logistics of Zoom or WebEx or whatever different programs are using, there's a few sort of logistical things to think about ahead of time. So the good connection is really important. If you can establish that at your house, that's great. Some people won't be able to. Their school may provide rooms that could be made available for interviews and so on. But thinking about that ahead of time. Appropriate background is also important. So a professional appropriate background, if that's not something, again, that you can establish, you can download a generic background that one can use. I think headphones are fine and sometimes even give a much better clarity of voice to facilitate an interview. So it's no problem to have headphones and also good lighting. So you may consider, I personally have invested in a ring light, which I think really helps for my virtual visits and I think is really effective in terms of good shadowing and so on. So just some of those logistical things are relatively inexpensive and can really look quite professional. And then I think it is absolutely fine to do the interview at home. Everyone's circumstances are different right now. Some people are home, some people are away, some people are on rotation, some people, everybody's in a different situation. So wherever you can kind of establish that will be absolutely fine. I don't see any problem with doing it at home. Again, just trying to think ahead about some of those logistical things that come with a virtual type experience. Someone had a question about technical difficulties. I think most programs are going to be quite understanding of that. Do whatever you can ahead of time to secure connection and so on. It probably is a two-way street. There's a reasonable chance you may run into the programs having some technical difficulties too. We're all sort of so hopefully we'll all be understanding of each other's the newness of all of this. So that's kind of the logistics things I wanted to talk to you guys about. Finally, one other thing that I wanted to put into this part was the thank you notes. So I think thank you notes are a great option. I think it's a very thoughtful way to express your gratitude for the time that the interviewers have taken for you. I think one really key thing with that is, again, kind of like we've talked about before, just being not generic about it. So really saying, this is what I really appreciated about our conversation or about your program, and really trying to reinforce the connection and what you really do look at as a positive or something that really draws you to that program. That's a nice way to reinforce that with your interviewers. And just focusing on what you love about that program. Some programs out there will ask you not to do a thank you letter. If that's the case, don't do one. If you're not sure, you can always ask your advisor. You always reach out to one of your advisors or someone that you've worked with to get some advice on that. I think that's all that we wanted to cover for this section. Happy to take questions about logistics of the virtual interview.
All right, one question here. Do you anticipate interviews will still largely be in November and December, or will the timeline look different due to the later ERA submission date?
I think that's probably dependent on program. I know our program is sticking pretty closely to things. And some of the rationale for that was that we don't have to expect people to travel. So it's really mostly on us in terms of turnaround time to get the invites out. But we're sticking almost entirely to our normal November and December schedule.
Yeah, I would echo that.
Likewise.
I think we'd like to get them done early, but we've tossed around that question of if we offer interviews on November, if we send out the invitations November 1st, how quickly can people be ready to interview? Like, what is the turnaround time needed for someone to be available? And you're absolutely right, because there's no travel, hopefully the timing is you can accept a interview request pretty quickly, but are people available and ready at a moment's notice to do it? So I am curious to see what programs around the country are going to do, but it sounds like at least in this panel, our programs are trying to keep to the November, December schedule. Mm-hmm.
And then I think programs that traditionally interview sometimes in January will still do in January. So
it sounds like be prepared for November, December, and some January. All right. Brian, I'll get back to your question from Kate. How many candidates are usually involved in the resident social?
I think that's going to vary quite a bit by program. I think some programs are going to be sort of grouping candidates together in a larger group, while some may just be having a social event with those interviewing on that same day. So if I had to get, well, gosh, it's hard because it depends. Probably, that's a tough question to answer. I'm going to say that's probably pretty program dependent.
I think most people have experienced I just not had the best experience with these large group Zoom. I'm sure we've all done these social events like baby showers and stuff. So the feedback that I'm getting is people are going to try to make an attempt to have the groups small enough, because Zoom has these breakout sessions, for example, because we want every candidate to have an opportunity to feel comfortable and ask questions and but that's our hope. I can't guarantee a program won't do like a 30-person session, which would be madness in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we may do larger sessions, but just as you said, Robbie, break it down into breakout rooms, and then maybe switch breakout rooms so that people get to talk to different people over the period of time. We'll see. All right, last session, I'm going to talk a little bit about how to sell yourself. Okay, this one can be tricky. So first of all, how to show interest in programs. So I think that how to show interest in programs. So obviously early on, attending any of the sessions that they have to showcase their program. So I know a lot of you have been very involved in seeing different programs through all the different virtual events. And then I think a follow-up email to the person hosting the event, the chief residents, the residency director is a good way to show that you were there, you attended, and you thought the program was important. I do think also showing interest in the program, we talked a lot about the letter, your personal statement and how to include something at the bottom. You know, if you had a really good experience at one of their interview virtual events, you can mention, when I attended your virtual events, I really enjoyed this aspect. So it's another way you can tie back that you've shown kind of a continuing interest with the program. Now, I know this year has been really tough because people have not been able to do visiting rotations. And so visiting rotations is a great way to show interest in a program. And with all the travel restrictions and the COVID restrictions, what if you haven't been able to do that? So I think it's, again, another thing that you can mention in the bottom of your personal statement. Maybe I would have loved to have done a visiting rotation, or I applied to do a visiting rotation at your school and wasn't able to because of COVID. I'm really sorry I missed out on that experience. So just kind of mentioning kind of your personal connections or ways that you were trying to get involved, I think can be helpful. I think another way to showcase yourself a little bit is really, once you've filled out your ARIS, once you've written your personal statement, kind of take a step back and think about, you know, what all of your experiences, what everything you've done, what that really says about you as a candidate, right? So, you know, you've maybe been a TA, maybe you were, you know, helped tutor students, you know, and maybe your favorite thing to do in your fourth year clerkships was to teach the third year students, right? And so maybe when you look back at everything, look at the big picture, you say, gosh, you know, one thing that really stands out in my application is that I like to teach, right? Or maybe you look back at your application and you say, gosh, you know, my most meaningful experience in medical school, although this may not apply to you guys, was my global health rotation, right? So maybe you didn't get to travel this year, so maybe that's a terrible example. Look back and say, gosh, what does my application really highlight? Is it my leadership? Is it my volunteerism? Is it my advocacy? Does it really showcase, you know, my teamwork or my communication, right? Or my commitment to wellness, right? So think about, is there something besides being an excellent medical student that all of your experience has really shown you to be? And if you can come up with that kind of track or path or you know, expertise that you have, think about kind of working that into your personal statement or working that into how you answer some of your questions, right? I think that everyone in medicine and in PM&R in specific, we really like to see that you have an area of interest or passion, right? We want you to be good clinically. We want you to excel in medical school. But that's not all, right? You're a person, you're a human. And so, you know, if your great passion is music and you are really good at the piano, good for you, because I'm not. But how can you bring that up as an interest? You know, that's something that you've excelled about through, you know, through childhood. How have you incorporated that into your medical school? Is it a source of wellness for you, right? And so think about kind of the longitudinal facets of your personality, of your experience, of your interest, and really try and highlight that as an area of expertise or interest that you have outside of being a good clinician. So that's one thing that I really like to see. We had a question, in your experience, what differentiates a good application from an exceptional application? So it's kind of that extra something else, right? What is that thing or passion or, you know, area of expertise that you've shown outside of medicine? And I just find that fascinating to see all the varying things that people have done and accomplished. And then, let's see, given the likelihood of increased application numbers this year to each program, how will program directors prepare for fatigue associated with reviewing multiple applications while avoiding cursory approaches? That is a difficult question to answer. Probably lots of coffee is the right answer. But, you know, I think the great thing about PM&R, so my GME office, our graduate medical education office, has demanded that all programs are at our hospital system are evaluating medical students based on a holistic approach and not just based on a number. And we just kind of laughed because in the field of PM&R, I think that we do a much better job of that than many other specialties. And so I think it makes it harder for us though, because we do have to look more closely at applications. And so I think that, you know, it is hard to look at all of those applications and be fresh for every single one. So, my program has multiple people looking at applications. We share applications, pass things back and forth, try to keep fresh eyes on it at all times. And again, coffee. And let's see, another question, how and where to address weaknesses in your application? So I do think that if there is something glaring, as you guys have talked about, be prepared to answer questions about it, but also your personal statement is a good place to discuss why something happened, okay? So if someone, for example, failed a step or had to spend extra time on a rotation or failed a rotation, I always wanna know why, and what did you learn from it? And so if it's not addressed anywhere in the application, then I scratch my head a little bit because I want to know what happened, right? And so the personal statement is a good place to address that. Sometimes there's, little areas in the ARIS where you can address it, but I feel like the personal statement is a really good place. And so, I don't want people to not get interviews because there's this red flag that we don't have any information about. So I know it's better to say, hey, maybe no one will notice and I'll sneak it through. But I do think being a little bit proactive about things like that can be helpful. A related question, this is not a weakness, but how will missing a core M3 rotation due to COVID affect residency applications? The same thing with, maybe you weren't able to do a PM&R rotation, or maybe you were only able to see outpatient, you didn't get to see inpatient. I think that this is just an extraordinary year. It is not your fault that you couldn't do an away rotation. It is not your fault that you couldn't do an M3 rotation and you had to take it later. And every residency program director in the country is going to know that. We know that COVID disrupted literally everything. And so we will take that information and do our best to review your application no matter what is or is not in there. If you want, you could say, write in there somewhere, have to take medicine later, because of COVID, but we're certainly going to understand that. And I wouldn't be surprised actually if your dean's letter addresses that, if the dean's letter say something about, why why certain rotations were delayed. And let's see if I hit all the questions. Yeah, I think those are my answers. Panel, did you have anything to add to a lot of that? I'm just that good. No one has anything to add.
No, you were really thorough.
That was great. I mean, as far as those kind of deficiencies in the application, yeah, I think it's best to address them too. Somebody's going to catch them somewhere along the way.
Yeah.
So I think being forthcoming really is the best advice, and just being honest about it, and because it will come up, people will figure it out. So the more kind of, it doesn't have to be the highlight of your personal statement or anything like that, but just acknowledging it and talking about it, like Leslie mentioned.
Mm-hmm. All right, a couple more questions to the group. Are there any thoughts in regards to candidates accepting a larger number of interviews because they will not be traveling?
I can comment on that. It's a fear, I think, for all of us who hold a program director or associate program director role. I mean, there's been a lot of chatter on various of our listservs. It's a fear. I don't know how to fix it or how to calm it. I think it's just I don't know. It's gonna pan out the way it pans out, and I don't know if anybody has any other things, but it's definitely, I think it's been talked about for sure.
Yeah, I think it's sort of inevitable with the system that we have this year. I think we're all programs are probably going to be experiencing that.
Mm-hmm.
One of the, I was just thinking, one of the things to kind of balance that out would be if, the only way a student could get really aggressive and do like 30 interviews would be if they did a research month. And so I know a lot of you, because of this time with COVID, you're just like really condensing a lot of your curriculum into like this fall and spring. So just based off of that, even though someone might want to accept 30 interviews, their rotation may not allow it. So there's going to be some level of checks and balances, just to be honest, So just go about it the same way, you know, and I wouldn't worry about that, I guess.
Mhm.
All right. What about if you've tried to take step 2 and haven't been able to do so because of scheduling and testing centers being closed?
I think it goes with all the other COVID related things. It has nothing to do with you. I don't know if anybody feels differently, but it is what it is.
I agree. Is it okay to assign 4 letters of recommendations to programs that do not specifically state only a maximum of 3 letters required? As long as they're good ones. I mean, if the program says only 3, maximum of 3, then only do 3.
Right.
If they don't have a maximum number, then feel free to send a 4th. I don't think it's going to hurt anything, but only if they're good. All right. Well, it's 7:56. If anyone has a last-minute question, we can answer it, and hopefully I didn't miss anybody's questions. All right, I see a lot of thank yous. Thanks everyone for coming.
I'll say thanks for coming.
Good luck this year. I'm sure you guys have Zoom fatigue already before the interview season has even started. So best of luck. We appreciate all the hard work you've done putting in your applications. We are so excited that you will be our future colleagues in physiatry. So best of luck. Have a wonderful interview season and looking forward to match day with everyone. All right.
Good luck, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Good luck, guys.